Now I would like to ask His Excellency Ebrahim Rasool to come and speak.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, I want to thank our hosts, the Turkic-American Alliance and the RumiForum, for hosting us here this evening and showing us the everyday face of Islam and Muslims. I want to acknowledge the presence of my fellow diplomats and ambassadors, especially the Turkish one, Ambassador Chan. I want to greet representatives from the White House and the State Department, from a variety of institutions and communities represented here. I think Ramadan is probably the one month that if you were to have a dipstick to understand what Islam is and what Muslims are, and you would apply that dipstick, you would see what is the body politic of the global Muslim community. You would find people fasting, praying, and helping others. And that should be the defining feature of Islam and Muslims in the world today. Because for them and for us, Ramadan is that month in which we develop our capacity for restraint and discipline, in which we celebrate the revelation of the Quran, and in which, in the words of God in the Quran, God's ears are open to the call of everyone who calls on God. And God challenges us to make a special effort also to listen to the call of God, because when you are freed up from bodily needs and you have divested yourself from worldly encumbrances and you have denigrated your body through fasting, it is in that moment that your soul emerges and you listen with the ears of your soul to the highest spiritual values that God demands of all of us. And that becomes the essence of the conversation between human beings and God. We often don't hear God, and we often don't do the things which are based on the values which are divine, because we are slaves to the bodily needs that we engage in every day. And over 1 billion Muslims have attuned their souls not only to communicate with God, but to listen to the values that God wants us to live with. And I explain this simply to say that this is the great middle ground in the world of Islam. Fasting to inculcate discipline and restraint, engaged with reading and understanding the Quran, and in a great conversation with our Creator. It is this moment when that middle ground stands separate from, on the one hand, mere formalistic imitation that often comes from orthodoxy and unable to respond to the global needs and the changing times in which we live. On the other hand, the siren songs of a destructive, fundamentalist extremism. And it is in moments like this that this middle ground emerges to be the greatest advert of what it means to be Muslim in the world today. The energy of this middle ground is constituted by their security in their faith. And it is this security of faith that allows that middle ground of Muslims to reach out to others, to engage in dialogue, to participate in interfaith relations, to not fear multiculturalism, to be able to do good irrespective of differences in background. And all of it emerges because of a secure faith, which is made even more secure through the month of fasting. It is this middle ground whose energy comes from the fact that they are, in the first instance, spiritual beings, rather than beings competing for interests, for worldly gain. Spiritual beings in direct communication with their Creator, able to imbibe the best values, even against themselves, in order to live lives of tranquility and harmony in the world in which we find ourselves. And the third element of this energy comes from building partnerships in order to make the world a better place. Not because it is convenient, opportunistic, or interest-based, but because it is demanded of every human being. In fact, the essence of Sharia, such a feared concept, particularly in the United States and all over the world, it is not a system of laws that governs what you do with women and what you do with infidels and how you create jihad and all of those kind of things. But at its core, the scholars of Islam agree that Sharia is to be a benefit for humanity and to ward off harm from humanity. Everything else around that is detail. And it is detail sometimes appropriated by those trapped in orthodoxy and therefore propagating views of Sharia of 1400 years ago. But it is also contested by fundamentalist extremists who want to appropriate it to totalize their control over society. It is nothing different from any other ideology, any other faith, any other community in the world. What we struggle with, you struggle with. What you struggle with, we struggle with. And rather than being on opposite sides of this divide, we need to understand that fundamentalism in every ideology is the enemy of humankind wherever it is. And so, it is this middle ground where Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, many hundreds of years ago, understood would reach moments when our search for material well-being would create in us vacuums, spiritual vacuums, vacuums from the divine, and created an understanding and a practice of Islam that would forever keep our souls sharp, keep our spirits high, and keep us in communication with the divine, so that we may always understand the higher purposes for which we have been created. It is this tradition that the Rumi Forum tries to keep alive and tries to inculcate a religion of the soul, a religion of spiritualism, and trying to fill the vacuums that we try in other ways to fill through consumerism and through constant engagement with our interests. It is the same middle ground that draws on the work of someone like Fathullah Gulen, who has understood how, on the one hand, sometimes orthodoxy does not take you into the world that we find ourselves in today, and how fundamentalism is a siren song that tempts us away from doing good, and how one can combine this deep spiritualism with a way to live in the world today, to live in dialogue with each other, to live integrated with each other, where we respect, respectively, the integrity of one and the integrity of all. How we become Muslims and Americans at the same time, where we respect America's need to maintain the integrity of its nation, but America respects our need to keep an identity that comes from being Muslim. And so it is with every other community. It is this kind of combination of the works of Rumi and the writings of Fathullah Gulen that allows us to navigate these troubled times in a world that globalizes. But as it globalizes, it creates melting pots where every different value, where every different identity can sometimes be melted down in order to create a deadening uniformity across the world and rob us of the beauty of the multitudes of humanity that we find ourselves in. At the same time, it's a response to those who, if you do not join that melting pot, would want to isolate you and alienate you as the other. And the other finds many different ways to do the same thing. The other is alienated and isolated through Islamophobia, through xenophobia, through racism, through sexism, through homophobia, through a range of different instruments to demonize, alienate, and isolate the other, because we don't know, in a world that is globalized, how to deal with each other's differences. On an occasion like this, we must respect the integrity of each other as the precondition for coexistence in the world in which we live. Nothing brings us closer to that than the practice of Ramadan, in which Muslims have to not only divest themselves of food, but have to divest themselves of prejudice, have to divest themselves of hatred, have to stand up for justice, firstly against ourselves, before we can stand up against tyrants, have to reform firstly ourselves, before we may want to reform societies. And that, I think, is the beauty of sharing iftar with all of us in one room under the banner of both the Turkic-American Alliance as well as the RumiForum. Those two could not have come together in a better way than to invite us and to be able to share such beautiful insights with all of us in a world that is deeply troubled. It's an exciting world, but if we're going to navigate this world, and especially what is happening in countries of the traditional Islamic world today, in the Middle East, we are going to have to make sure that we navigate the ship in such a way that we renounce what is unsustainable in the form of regimes that have totalized all power for themselves, without democracy, without human rights, and without being able to look after the people, but at the same time navigate the ship so that we also avoid the undesirable. And that is those who want to totalize in completely different ways. Those are the challenges that we face, and this is the best Ramadan to raise our voices so that our Creator can hear us, but at the same time open our spiritual ears so that we too can hear what is expected of us. Thank you very much.